Hello, everyone. It's Sinead Willihan, and we are back with Barbara Lamb, who you can see on the screen with me right now for Barbara School number 11. And in Barbara School number 11, Barbara's going to be talking about spirit visitations and other interesting contacts she's had with spirits and other beings that have shown up in her life and impacted her experience, helped her to grow, sent her on a new direction in her life. We're going to hear exactly what happened. So first of all, Barbara, how are you today? It's great to see you as always.
Well, I'm just fine and lovely to see you.
Great, great. It's summertime. You're still wearing a sweater. I don't know how you're doing it, but I am boiling hot.
Not really a sweater, it's very lightweight. That's
This
good.
is not at all the topic. I just went straight to weather because I've been very humid all day. It's very hot here in Toronto. But spirit visitations are a lot more interesting. So why don't we go straight to that? I'm dying to hear your first one. I know you have a list of a few of them that you're wanting to share with us. So what's the first one that you're going to be talking about?
Well, first of all, I would like to see that on another one of these broadcasts, I talked about my own spirit visitations with loved ones of mine who had died when the person in various ways really showed up. So this talk is a little bit different in the sense that there have been evidences that I have witnessed and other people have witnessed of somebody else's spirit showing up after physically having passed away. So the first one that I want to talk about, and this directly came into my very special experience. About 8 years ago or so, my very dear husband passed away. And about a month or so later, I was visiting a mutual friend of ours, a woman named Ivy, who had come originally from England. And I was visiting her for late afternoon tea, as I often did. And she knew my husband Warren very well and liked him tremendously. And on this particular afternoon, when I was visiting for her for tea, she had her own daughter in law visiting from across the country. And she wanted me to tell her daughter in law about my deceased husband and the amazing original work that he did. And he did it all over the world. Well, I was very happy talking about my husband and his wonderful creative work. And I was recognizing that as I was talking about him and his work, I was getting more and more energized, more and more excited. I was just really tremendously happy to be sharing about his work, which I had admired so much. So after probably about 15 or 20 minutes of this excited reporting about him and his work, suddenly the lamp on the table next to my friend Ivy, the lamp suddenly went on all by itself. And I had been looking at her and I noticed that she did not reach over and turn on that lamp. So we were all surprised. And my first thought was, oh, maybe it's Warren hearing this. And I actually said out loud to him, Warren, I hope that you've heard everything I was saying about you because it was so wonderful. And then Ivy said, that's not possible that this lamp has turned on. And and the daughter-in-law said, well, maybe it's on a timer. And she said, no, I don't have any lamps on timers. And it's even more impossible that that turned on because there is no light bulb in that lamp. Whoa,
Wow.
how could that light turn on
Uh-huh.
without a light bulb? So I was absolutely stunned and got up from my chair and went over and looked under the lampshade just to be sure. And sure enough, there was no light bulb in there, but the light was still on.
That is
and
long.
it remained for like, oh, I'd say 3 or 4 minutes. And then gradually we noticed that it wasn't shining light anymore. But I think that that was a wonderful, dramatic example of a spirit being attracted to hearing what was being said about him.
Mm,
That he actually, however they do it, I don't know, he actually managed to be there and to physically turn on that lamp, even without a light bulb in it.
oh my goodness.
We all witnessed that. It was very, very clear that he had. So that was very exciting to me. I think,
I've got to ask you something about that because um how did you, I mean, there's people pass away, right? Like you've known people that have passed away, your friend who was there with you, have known people that have passed away. You were talking about your husband, but what was it that made you immediately, like other than talking about him, was there anything that made you immediately assume it was him that was in the room and not someone else, not another spirit visiting?
well, it just seemed, I mean, maybe it was another spirit, who knows? But since I had been talking about him and we had been very close in our relationship for 29 years, I just assumed that it was him, that
Is
he had
that
been
something?
attracted to our sharing and attracted to my visiting with my friend Ivy and her daughter-in-law, and particularly the aspect of my talking so enthusiastically about him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Makes a lot of sense. I was wondering if maybe you could feel him in the room because sometimes people literally feel the presence, as if the person is physically there.
I think after the light went on, that is when I did feel that sense of presence, that he was there, and said, "Oh, Warren, Warren." You know, I couldn't see him, but I could feel him. And then there was this evidence that somebody, presumably he, had turned on that lamp, even without a light bulb being in it.
That is just amazing.
On to another experience. There was a man in my experiencer group who passed away, and I went to his funeral, as did all of us in our group. And there was a part of the ceremony when I noticed that the flag, the American flag that had been placed over his casket, was taken up by some military officers and folded in the very special ritual way that they have of folding up the American flag. And the man who had passed away had been in the military. So this was a regular, normal part of the funeral ceremony for him. And the men, the military men, having folded up the flag in this ritual way, they were heading toward the widow of this man. And then they diverted where they were going and presented the flag to the man's grown daughter, a woman who was in her early 30s, instead of giving it to the wife. And while that was happening, the daughter, she told me later, the daughter heard her father's voice in her own head and felt his presence right there between the flag and her, and said, "This flag is for you. You will be keeping this safe and sound and very special in memory of me." And he also went on to say, "Do not worry about me. I am fine. Just remember all the good times that we had together." So that was lovely. And she reported that to me when the funeral was over. And I could actually see the men heading toward the wife with the flag and then changing direction slightly and presenting it to the daughter. So the father, I think, from the spirit realm had influenced that they would give the flag to the daughter instead of to the wife. Anyway, it meant a great deal to the daughter, and um, I was very pleased that she had shared that with me. It was a lovely experience.
That's very moving and also interesting because of what you said about the diversion of movement and the fact that I'm not American, I'm Canadian, but every time I've ever seen or heard about one of those ceremonies, it always goes to the spouse, not to the child. So that's definitely interesting.
Yes, yes, it was. He had a perfectly good wife, but he somehow felt that it would be more meaningful, I believe, and she would take very good care of it if it went to the daughter instead. So
Beautiful.
I thought that was a meaningful event. So then, a few years later, another friend of mine had a 21-year-old son who had suddenly died. And we had a funeral for him and a reception at their home. And in the home of the deceased boy, um, there was a nice photo portrait of him propped up on the mantelpiece. Nice big one, about 11 by 18 inches or so. And we were standing around um, having some cocktails and looking at the portrait of him and toasting him, with good wishes and wishing him well in his spirit life. And as we were doing that, the picture leaning against the wall on the mantle started moving forward and back, wiggling, and then fell right over onto the floor. So we all felt that this deceased son had been right there trying to indicate to us that he is continuing and he was visiting us while we were commemorating him. So I know some of us were very excited, and his mother was excited too.
Great.
Oh, he's with us, she said.
Oh, that's great. Do you have any sense of what her beliefs were? I mean, was she open to the spirit carrying on? Was she someone who was religious? Okay.
I don't think she had been, especially one way or the other. It just wasn't something that she had particularly thought about until he died. And then, of course, she was really wondering about him and giving thought to that sort of thing. But she felt, oh, that's great. He's showing us that he's all right and that he's here with us,
Wow.
aware of our toasting him and all the wonderful things that people were saying about him.
Interesting.
So I thought that was really, really lovely.
Mm.
And then there was a time with another woman who was a therapy client of mine who had lost her husband. They'd been married almost 50 years, and she had been extremely dependent on the husband while he was living. And he was a very dynamic guy and owned his own business and was very successful in business, successful in life, and part of various social organizations. And just an all around wonderful guy. And this widow, though, was just the opposite. She stayed home most of the time while he was out doing community events and running his business. And she was, as I said, very, very dependent upon him. So that when he died, she was in enormous amount of mourning and feeling very, very insecure in life without him. So I knew her two daughters, who were in their 30s, wonderful, wonderful young women, and they were very concerned about their mother. So on one occasion, I invited a psychic medium whom I had already been to, who did wonderful, wonderful work. I invited this psychic medium to come to the woman's home that evening, and the two daughters were there. So it was the daughters, myself, the medium, and the grieving woman. And the medium was bringing through messages from the deceased husband, and the widow was just not believing it at all. She just thought that he had died and disappeared entirely, that there couldn't be anything possibly left of him. She did not have an understanding about lives between lives. So she was not being cheered by this medium's work at all. And yet I was, and the daughters were thrilled and very moved by what he was saying. But since he wasn't really getting through to the widow in any convincing way, we noticed after a while that the tall standing lamp by one end of the sofa where the widow was sitting, the standing lamp began to sway and then crashed over and broke on the floor. And the two daughters immediately said, "Oh, Daddy, good. Thank you for showing us you're here."
Uh-huh.
And the medium uh, added to that and said, "Yes, yes, he's saying he is right here in the living room with you all." Well, that still didn't convince the widow. And she was so distraught and so sad, poor dear. And so after a while, we noticed that the husband's favorite painting, which had been in a heavy frame and glass, that painting lifted up off its hook on the wall with no hands doing it. Nobody was even near it, but we watched it happen. This heavy painting lifted up off the hook on the wall, and then it too crashed over onto the floor, and the glass shattered, of course, and everything.
You cannot deny that.
And still, the widow did not feel convinced, even though the rest of us did. And the daughters were again celebrating. Good show. Bravo, Daddy. Boy, you really still have strength. And that was a great move, you know,
It was.
sitting there. So, anyway, then the medium said, your husband is saying to you that every night when you go to bed and you turn out the bedside lamp and you settle down into the pillow, that I am there kissing you softly on the cheek. And I want you to really notice that. It's very subtle, it's very soft, but I am there and I want you to feel me kissing you on the cheek. So, fortunately, after that event that evening, the wife did start tuning in to that subtle feeling when she would turn off the lamp and settle down into her bed for the night's sleep. And she did report eventually that, yes, she could feel very, very slight, sweet feeling on her cheek. It was always the same cheek, night after night. And that helped her to feel much better about her husband being in the spirit world and
That's,
continuing on
that's
with
beautiful.
his existence. Yeah, I thought that was really nice. And oh, thank goodness she finally found some relief. It turned out that after that, she was able to go on with her life a little better by going out and gathering together with other people, attending events, meeting with friends. And even after about a year or so, she got into a very nice relationship with another man.
Oh my goodness.
She would not have been able to do if she had not gotten through her disbelief about her deceased husband and her grieving. So that was a very nice for
It
that.
really is. That is something else, seeing a picture rise up from its hook on the wall and crash to the ground. That is something you absolutely cannot deny. Pictures just don't do that. There's no
Right.
other explanation. And how heartwarming that she got closure she didn't even realize she could get, or may not even have realized she needed, and was able to move on. I mean, that is so encouraging. And that's something I have heard many times from people who've been to see legitimate mediums, is that it helps them find closure. It helps them have peace or release,
Yeah,
or let go, of the person who's passed away. Yeah, it's very healing. That's beautiful. Wow.
I know.
Mm.
So another event, a slightly different type of event, but showing about spirit visiting. Um, there was a lady, well, I my experiencer group, which met monthly for many, many years. On one occasion, we met at another person's home, the home of a couple. And one of the ladies in the group uh, that night, she felt, well, she was wearing a short skirt and had bare legs. And she kept leaning down and sort of touching her lower legs. I had noticed that and wondered why. And eventually she said, it's so strange, but I keep feeling something brushing against my legs as if it's something walking by. And it's very soft and smooth. And it's just brushing against my lower shins. And at that point, the host and hostess of that house said, "Oh, maybe that's Maggie, our cat who died a year or so ago. Maybe Maggie is visiting." And then the woman who had been feeling this brushing against her leg said, "Oh, yeah, well, that makes sense because yeah, it was very soft and smooth. Yeah, that could have been a cat. Yeah, I think that was right. That's what it must have been." So that was sort of fun. And there's so many stories of this, um, that do come and visit the people, whom they had their homes with. That is absolutely wonderful. And then there was a wonderful woman whom I encountered in the late 1970s at a conference, actually. Her name was Olga Worrell. And Olga Worrell had a lot of abilities. She could kind of see into other dimensions, and she and her husband were both known psychics. Well, she said in her lecture that one day she had some film to finish up and wanted to take it in for developing. She just had one picture left. And she thought, oh, what'll I do to take this last picture? Well, she went out her front door and across the road into the yard across the street. And there was a beautiful big dog whom she had known well. And she took a picture of the big dog. And then, when she got the film developed and looked at that particular film, there was the big dog, just as she had taken the picture, and on its back was standing a little white dog. And the little white dog had been living in that household too, but had died sometime earlier. But here was his spirit, looking just as much like a real dog as the big dog looked, and
Wow.
standing upright right on top of the back of the standing dog. So that was a spirit photograph and was very exciting to see. And of course, since then, too, I've heard of many, many testimonies of beloved pets returning after they have passed away,
Mhm.
visiting their owners. I think that that's actually a very common thing. But to have
Apparently.
of that little white dog visiting from the spirit realm is very, very special.
Oh, very. That is incredible. Did she ever do anything with it, like trying to get it, verified, or did she ever try to publish it or anything like that? This
I don't,
photograph?
I don't know if she did or not, but it was very clear, and she showed it in this lecture. Uh, that was good enough for me.
Oh, yes, that is something else.
Then she also showed a series of photographs. These were old photographs of her family members. They were photographs from the early 1900s and probably toward the end of the 1800s. So these were some of her ancestors in these old photographs. And around the heads of the people in the photograph, there were many other heads too, here and there, of other people whom she didn't even know. And some of them had different headdresses on, different kind of hats or different hairstyles, or even a man with a turban, and various, in other words, people who looked like they had been living even before the people in the photograph had
Wow.
been. And she pointed out that it does happen sometimes in old photographs. So she advised us all to look at old family photographs. The older, the better, because the older the photograph of people, uh, the more likely it is that other beings will show up in those photographs. So she was giving advice to those of us in the audience to look at our family's old photos.
I wonder why. Like,
Any other faces have, in the meantime, shown up.
yeah, yeah. Any of their ancestors who are making an appearance and participating in the photograph. I wonder if that's because older photographs, the exposure time was so much longer. I wonder if the exposure has something to do with it because of the way light would have been behaving inside the camera and the way light would have, yeah, that's got to have something to do with it versus digital now. Yeah. Interesting.
Right. Even versus more recently taken photographs,
Hmm.
10, 15, 20 years ago. Yeah, so I thought that was very interesting. I haven't heard of that before, or even since.
Uh-huh.
So another wonderful thing that happened, and this was not a spirit. I would say this has to do with a being that a few years ago I was sitting in my back garden patio one nice sunny afternoon, talking on my cell phone to a friend up in Washington State. And I was talking to this friend very enthusiastically about mantis, extraterrestrial beings. And this friend was very interested in extraterrestrial beings. So it was a very nice opportunity for me to have a nice leisurely chat with him about the mantis beings who I had become very, very interested in and very fond of from the regressions that I had done with many people who had had experiences with mantis beings. So I was talking, I would guess, for 15 or 20 minutes about mantis beings. And I was aware that I was getting more and more enthused about the mantis beings that I knew of from my clients, and was really praising them and how wise they are and kindly and intelligent they are, and going on and on about this. And my friend was just listening happily. And suddenly, after about 15 or 20 minutes, I looked down at my own lap, and there on my thigh, I had dark slacks on, and there on my thigh was a little tiny baby praying mantis insect.
Oh,
He was about 1 inch long. He was so sweet. He was light green and he had, big bulbous eyes in relation to his tiny little head. And they were light green also. And he was alive. He was just lying there on my lap. And I thought, wow, the chances of my talking for 15, 20 minutes enthusiastically about mantis beings and then finding one on my own lap. Now, before that time, I had had absolutely no awareness of praying mantis insects being in my garden. And I had done lots of gardening. And I would have seen them. I would have thought at some time during many years that I had been there. But here was this baby mantis, and I stopped talking to my friend and used my cell phone to take a photo of him to prove that this had really happened. And after several minutes, I looked down again, and the little insect was not there anymore, but he had really shown up. And I do have a photo on my cell phone to show that that really happened. So I think that with the mantis beings, maybe this is true for other extraterrestrial beings too, that they show that they are aware that we are aware of them by
mhm.
manifesting their presence in terms of one of the earth insects, praying mantis insects. So, since that happened, there are several other testimonies from other people that I know about who have been having an interest in mantis beings, learning about them or talking about them, like two of my women friends did. One night I was visiting in their home and we were talking about mantis beings in particular. And they were very, very interested. They hadn't known anything about that type of extraterrestrial, but they were learning a lot from what I was sharing with them, and they were becoming interested. And the next morning, they were sitting at their breakfast table right by their kitchen window. And one of them looked out and saw that sitting on the windowsill, right outside the window from where they were, was a praying mantis insect about 4 inches tall. And
Come
they
on.
were amazed. Oh, that's one of the mantises. We were just learning about them last night. And both of those women had done a lot of gardening outside that window and had never noticed any praying mantis insects before that.
Oh my goodness.
That seemed to be connected,
Yeah.
um, having learned and been very interested in praying mantises the night before. So then I've had other clients who have had extraterrestrial encounters with the big, tall mantis beings, and several of them have reported that after having that regression, might be a day later, it might be a few days later, that they will notice a praying mantis insect right outside their homes. One lady opened the front door to go out one day, and there was a praying mantis insect on the outside of the door handle. Another one was getting into her car and noticed it right on the top of the car by the driver's door was sitting a praying mantis insect. And another lady who had had mantis beings appear in her regressions went outside one day and suddenly noticed that on her own shoulder there was sitting a praying mantis insect looking right at her, wanting to stay. She actually opened the door and got in her car to drive away. And this insects stayed there through the whole drive to wherever she was going. And
Goodness.
since then, she noticed that when she would go outside with her son and her husband, they would notice that there was a praying mantis on their finger or on their chest or on their head.
Oh my
And
God.
once she had uncovered that she was having experiences with the mantis beings, that's when a whole series of praying mantis insects showed up for her and her family.
That is so funny. I mean, praying mantises do not just land on people. Like that's not something they usually land on something else. They don't
Uh-huh.
just land on a moving, breathing human being because we're intimidating to them. Of course, we're enormous. You know, we're huge. We have a lot more power than they do. They don't just come and land on people. That is something else. And also the timing of each example you're giving, right? It's not weeks or months later, it's the next morning, it's the next day, or it's right then and there.
Very soon thereafter. And so there seems to be a connection.
Hmm.
Don't know if other extraterrestrials manifest some kind of form on Earth to let people know that there is a connection with their experiences with those extraterrestrial beings. But I have heard of it several times in regard to the mantis extraterrestrials seeming to coordinate with their representation on Earth. And you know, praying mantis insects are pretty remarkable.
Yes, they are.
They're a very, very big insect
Mhm.
compared to most. And as I say, they're often about 4 inches tall, which is pretty good. And they have the eyes and they have arms that fold over, kind of an extra appendage on their arms. And they have really big, big eyes that seem to wrap around the side of their head. And that's what the mantis extraterrestrial beings look like as well. So it just seems like that the insects that we have, praying mantis insects, are sort of representatives of
Yeah.
the out in space and probably really connected with them to make sure that the people who know about their connections with the extraterrestrial mantis beings, it's like they are validating that for
Hmm.
these people.
Yeah, I mean, it's making me think of a couple of things. One is this is more of a humorous reference, but it's something that's always stayed in my memory. When I was a child, my father gave me the book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams to
Ah,
read. And it's a wonderful series of books. It's a he calls it the author calls it a trilogy in 4 parts. It's supposed to be very funny. The whole thing is a take on just absurdism, but there's all kinds of other messages in there. And one of the seemingly humorous things that he did with the storytelling he was doing about basically the decline of Earth, and this one man who is out getting his newspaper in his bathrobe one morning and is whisked off to outer space. That's essentially what happens as Earth is being bulldozed.
oh,
But one of the things he learns as he's traveling around space is that mice were deliberately put on Earth to observe us, like to keep track of us, and that mice appear to be inferior to us, and we think we're doing all these lab tests on them, and we think that we're doing this and that on them, but really they have the upper hand and they're more intelligent, and they've been here studying us for thousands and thousands of years, right? So that's what was in the book, and I loved that idea. I remember reading that as a kid and thinking, that's such a cool idea. I just got really excited about it and never forgot it. So then now that I'm in this field, you and I are in the field of ufology and the paranormal and, all the interesting things going on as part of the human experience that are not normally talked about. And one of them is what our origins really are. And there's a lot of research. Paul Anthony Wallace is one of my favorite authors and researchers on this topic,
yeah,
investigating how human beings really came to be. And the predominant theory seems to be that we were seeded, for lack of a better word, by extraterrestrials. So it would make sense to me that if extraterrestrials did participate in manipulating our DNA and co-creating us, that of course they would put remnants of themselves or their planets or, their frame of reference, whatever their frame of reference is, they would use that to create things here on this planet for us to experience. To me, that makes complete sense, if that's the theory. Yeah.
That's a great thought.
Mm.
I
It's
like that. Makes sense to me too.
it's fun to think about. Wow. That is that's a wonderful string of experiences with mantis, and they do seem to be very friendly extraterrestrials overall.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's so much that goes on that we can just pass right on by and not think very much of. But when we do think about some of these things, think, oh, there must be a connection here. That this little event that happened may have more to it than meets the eye.
Definitely.
It's
Definitely.
wonderful to really notice those things.
Yeah, I mean, synchronicities.
They lead to so much bigger awareness, like the picture of the 21-year-old man wavering and falling off. I mean, nobody was near that mantle. There wasn't any earth tremor. There seemed to be nothing that could have been creating that picture moving and falling off, except maybe the presence of the sun, whose picture that was.
It would make sense. I mean, if no one was there bumping their elbow into it, and mantles are pretty solid things. Mantles are not made out of plastic. So, yeah.
A good, solid, thick mantle, and not on an angle or a slant or anything, perfectly flat. So I think it's what's behind these events that happen that is the most important thing. I mean, there could be, and there probably were, people at that reception for the 21-year-old man. There probably were people there who just thought, oh, that's weird, the picture just fell off. Haha, what a strange coincidence. And that's all. But some of us, like myself, and the mother too, think, that couldn't have just happened by itself.
Yeah, like it's the timing.
Toasting. We all had our little glasses up and were toasting that young man who had died. And then it seemed like it direct response to that, the picture then poof.
Interesting. Well, I mean, a lot of psychic mediums have said that people who pass over love attending their own funerals. That
Yes. Being said about them.
yeah, exactly. To know what's being said about them and that they love hearing all the positive things. I was thinking about that when you were giving the example of talking about your husband Warren, who had passed away. You were having such a positive conversation about him and talking about what a wonderful person he was. And I don't know if you've ever heard about Tyler Henry. Tyler Henry is a really incredible psychic. I'm a major fan. He's something like 24, 25, 26 years old. Anyway, he talks about this he's mentioned this many times, that not only do people who have passed on like to attend their own funerals, but they like to listen to all the nice things that people say about them, and they really enjoy that. So, and it's one of the things they want to hear when they come through in a session that he has with a loved one, or whoever's there to meet that person who's passed over, that they want to hear memories that you've had with them, or that they were good looking, or that they had great taste in fashion, or whatever it was. It's funny. It's really funny. Why would that matter, right? Why would that matter at all to someone who has passed on, who probably no longer has a body? But it seems to be one of those things that comes through over and over and over again, just like in your experience, the mantis beings have come through over and over and over again. Why would that be? We can only theorize, but the patterns and the synchronicities and the timing, just too much of the time with stories like this,
Mm.
really, there doesn't seem to be any real explanation scientifically or otherwise that would prove, would explain why that would possibly happen. And there are so many things that happen that we are completely mystified about. We like to think that we know everything, and we really don't. So,
No.
yeah, the mystery is amazing to explore.
Yeah. So I
Hmm.
think it's very exciting and actually very enhancing to
Yeah.
our lives. I'm very pleased to know about some of these things and experience them once in a while.
Mhm.
Right.
I think
Well,
that's
I
a, sorry.
that's today.
Oh, that's all for today. Okay, well, I was just going to say that is a great note to end on, Barbara, that, the mystery enhances our experience of life. It can make us anxious or it can enhance our experience of life. I prefer to feel enhanced rather than anxious.
So do I. Yeah. And blessed, blessed for having these hints of a bigger reality than we are usually aware of as
Yeah,
we live our lives.
yeah.
That's what I like about it.
Ditto. It's pretty exciting.
With other dimensions of reality that are just as real as this, although sometimes that's hard for us to believe because we're so accustomed to the dense material world that we live in.
Mhm.
So much more. It's just as real,
I
just
love
in a way, a different frequency.
I love that, Barbara. I love that. Let's let that be the final note, what you just said. That's beautiful. And I hope that everyone who heard this today is really encouraged by these examples, and that, in some way it's validating for people who are listening who may be questioning for themselves experiences that they're having and not knowing for sure if they can believe in them or not, even if their guts are screaming, this is really happening. Sometimes it's really helpful to hear that validation, and you provided a lot of validation and wonderful examples today. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And yes, I think the main point of sharing about these things is that it can sort of click on certain recollections that many people have of these types of things that may have happened to them, and it sort of validates that these things do really happen sometimes.
You heard it here, folks. You heard it from Barbara in Barbara School. So I hope that this was helpful to everyone who's been listening. And, thank you to all of you who have been listening and commenting and giving Barbara direct feedback about how much you're enjoying these talks. We really, really appreciate it. And Barbara, we appreciate you and all your work. And thank you, everyone, for being with us to bear witness to Barbara's life and her experiences and her expertise. And we'll be back very soon with Barbara School number 12. See you very soon, everyone. Thanks so much for being here.